She was the maid he abandoned when the world judged her worth by her skin. But years later, she returned, with his twins in her arms and power in her presence, leaving the millionaire on his knees, begging for a second chance at the family he once threw away. Before we dive into the story, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And what's the time on your clock right now? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing how far our stories reach. Now, let's begin. Zariah Monroe stood outside the massive black iron gates of the Carter estate, her heart steady yet cautious, her brown eyes reflecting both determination and uncertainty. The job meant everything to her, not just financially, but as a step into stability after years of quiet struggle. As the gates creaked open and she walked along the perfectly trimmed path leading to the grand mansion, she adjusted the strap of her modest leather bag and inhaled deeply, taking in the fresh scent of manicured roses and ambition. Inside, the house was quiet, almost too perfect, with polished marble floors that echoed her careful footsteps. She was greeted by a housekeeper who led her upstairs to meet her new student, 14-year-old Clara Carter, bright but a bit rebellious according to the agency report. Zariah smiled warmly, her calm presence instantly softening Clara's guarded demeanor. They talked, not just about math or literature, but about music, dreams, and quiet fears that Clara hadn't told anyone in months. Down the hall, behind a slightly open door, Liam Carter watched silently. His navy blue tailored suit clung to his broad shoulders as his blue eyes studied the new tutor, curious about the way her words held warmth and her posture carried pride without arrogance. He wasn't used to that. People in his world either fawned or flattered, but she was just present. Zariah had no idea that the heir to the Carter empire stood only a few steps away, observing her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Over the next few days, her presence became something like sunlight filtering into a house that had grown cold. She arrived each morning with a notebook in one hand, fresh fruit in the other, offering knowledge and nourishment with the same grace. Clara smiled more, spoke more, laughed even. Liam noticed it, and for the first time in years, he slowed down. He started eating breakfast. At the same time, Zariah tutored, just to listen to her voice from across the room, though he told himself it was coincidence. Zariah, meanwhile, remained focused. She felt his eyes sometimes, that quiet blue stare that seemed to both scan and shelter her, but she ignored it. She couldn't afford distractions, not when she'd worked so hard to rebuild her life. Still, when Liam asked her if she'd like coffee one morning after class, her voice caught in her throat before she managed a polite, "Thank you, but I should be going." He watched her leave that day, wondering why a woman so kind seemed to carry something hidden beneath her skin, some story written in silence. He began joining Clara's lessons under the guise of being a supportive brother. Zariah noticed, of course, but kept her professional tone, even when his fingers brushed hers while handing over a pencil, or when his praise lingered too long. But there were moments, brief, unscripted, and intimate, when their eyes met and both forgot the boundaries between employer and teacher. She corrected Clara's grammar while Liam corrected his heart, each moment pulling him closer to a truth he hadn't expected. He was falling. Not for her beauty, though she was stunning with her deep brown eyes and elegant braids, but for her goodness, her softness, her strength. One afternoon, Clara was called away for a dentist appointment. Zariah stayed behind to reorganize some papers. Liam entered the room, loosening his tie, offering her tea. Their conversation shifted, no longer about Clara's studies, but about dreams, childhood memories, favorite books. He told her how empty his house felt since his mother passed, and she told him about nights growing up sleeping on the couch so her little brother could have the bed. Their stories met in the middle, like two rivers merging, different origins, same direction. There was a moment, quiet but charged, when Liam reached out to touch her hand, and she didn't pull away immediately. Her heart raced, but her voice was calm when she whispered, "We're from different worlds, Mr. Carter." He chuckled softly, eyes glowing. "Then let me visit yours." That night, Zariah replayed the conversation again and again. She didn't want to fall, not for someone who probably had a dozen women at his beck and call, someone who lived in a glass tower while she was still sweeping dust from her old life. But the way he listened, the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world of polished lies, it cracked something open. Over the following weeks, Liam made excuses to see her more often, offering her rides, walking with her to the car, sending books he claimed Clara should read, but that were clearly chosen for Zariah's taste. And yet, he never crossed the line. He didn't touch her, didn't confess anything. He let his actions speak in soft gestures and silent devotion. One day, Zariah brought Clara a birthday gift, a handmade scrapbook of her tutoring progress. Clara beamed. Liam was speechless. No one had done something so heartfelt for his sister in years. After Zariah left, Clara whispered, "I think she's the only person who really sees me." That night, Liam stared out his window for hours, watching the moonlight dance on the lawn, thinking about how Zariah walked into their lives quietly and transformed everything. He didn't know yet how deeply she would change his own. Zariah, meanwhile, began feeling the ache of something dangerous: hope. It crept in like morning light, reminding her that maybe love could come gently, without shouting, without breaking. She tried to focus on her work, on the lessons, on keeping her distance. But one evening, when she was gathering her things and Liam offered to walk her out, she hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the night air was cool, their footsteps soft on the gravel. "You don't belong in my world," he said suddenly, turning to her. She looked up, stunned. "Excuse me?" He smiled, half sad, half in awe. "You're too ill for it." She didn't know what to say. The silence hung heavy, but not awkward. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes. She opened her car door, but paused. "You're not what I expected either," she admitted. "In what way?" he asked. "I thought millionaires were cold." She smiled faintly. "But I think you've just been lonely too long." He said nothing, just watched her drive away, his reflection fading in the glow of her taillights. In that moment he knew this was no ordinary attraction. It was the beginning of something he could no longer deny. That night, after watching Zariah's taillights disappear into the darkness, Liam stood in silence, hands tucked into his coat pockets, heart thudding harder than he expected, as if something fragile had been placed into his hands without warning. The next morning he arrived at breakfast earlier than usual, freshly shaven, the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled slightly, looking more like a man chasing purpose than a man running an empire. He sat at the edge of the long marble table, pretending to read business reports, but his eyes kept flicking toward the hallway, waiting for the familiar sound of Zariah's gentle voice greeting the staff. When she finally entered, her presence, simple yet graceful in a soft blue blouse and tailored pants, shifted the atmosphere. She greeted him with a polite nod, surprised to see him there so early, but said nothing. He offered a soft, "Good morning," the kind that carried weight beneath its politeness. She responded with a smile that faded too quickly, aware of the lingering air between them. As Clara's lesson began, Liam stayed, sitting nearby with a laptop that remained unopened. He pretended to work, but really, he was watching how Zariah explained things patiently, how her eyes lit up when Clara understood a concept, how she corrected mistakes without condescension. It wasn't attraction alone, it was admiration, curiosity, the aching pull of something honest in a world full of pretense. That afternoon he asked if she'd like tea by the fireplace while Clara took a break. She hesitated, then agreed. They sat in silence for a few moments, the soft crackling of fire filling the space between them. Zariah tucked a loose braid behind her ear, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the teacup. Liam noticed and gently said, "You always carry yourself like nothing touches you." She glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "I just do what I'm here to do," she finally answered. "And you do it beautifully," he said without looking at her. The compliment landed between them like a dropped match, small but dangerous. She sipped her tea, heartbeat quickening. He leaned back, watching the flames, then turned his head slightly. "Do you always keep a wall up, or is it just around me?" She blinked, stunned by the directness. "I prefer clarity," she replied, "especially when things are blurry." He gave a faint smile. "So, we're blurry now?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked, Ked back at the fire, and for a long second they said nothing, yet everything. Later that week he passed by the study as Zariah helped Clara with literature. Their laughter filtered into the hallway, light and genuine. He paused, hand on the doorknob, just listening. Something about the sound made him feel like he was on the outside of something he desperately wanted to be part of. The next day, Clara was out with friends, and Zariah was organizing books in the study. Liam walked in and offered to help. She shook her head, but he stayed anyway. He reached for a stack of books, and their hands brushed, brief, accidental, but charged enough to make her flinch and him hold his breath. She pulled away quickly, pretending it meant nothing, but the air around them had shifted. "You don't have to tiptoe around me," he said softly. "I'm not," she replied without looking at him. "Then why do you always leave the room the second I walk in?" he asked. "Because you confuse me," she said, finally turning to face him, "and I don't like confusion." He stepped closer, not threateningly, just enough to close the space between them. "I confuse myself too, every time you walk through that door." Her breath hitched, but she stood her ground. "This is your world, Liam. I'm just a visitor in it." "You've changed my world," he whispered, "and I don't know how to go back to what it was before you." She looked away, struggling to control the storm inside her. "You say things you shouldn't." "Maybe I feel things I shouldn't too," he replied, his voice almost a confession. She stepped back, heart racing, then turned toward the shelf, pretending to adjust a book that didn't need adjusting. "This isn't part of my job description," he chuckled quietly. "Neither was falling for your voice, or the way you talk about books, or the way you look when you're lost in thought." She closed her eyes briefly, willing herself not to feel. "This can't happen." "Then tell me it's one-sided," he challenged, stepping back. She said nothing. The silence was louder than any answer. Over the next week, the tension grew like vines climbing a wall, beautiful, messy, and impossible to ignore. He brought coffee without asking her preference, but somehow always got it right. She left behind a scarf one day, and he kept it, tracing the soft fabric like it was something sacred. She tried to stay cold, professional, distant, but every time he smiled at Clara or thanked her for her work, her heart betrayed her. One afternoon, it began to rain heavily. She'd forgotten her umbrella. Liam saw her waiting under the arch near the garage, arms folded, trying to stay dry. Without a word, he appeared beside her, offering his coat. She hesitated. "I'm fine." "You're not," he said. "You're soaking." She looked up at him, rain clinging to her lashes, and something passed between them, longing, fear, recognition. He reached out, gently pulling the coat over her shoulders. "Let me take you home." She nodded, too tired to argue. The car ride was quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the rain tapping against the windows. He didn't speak until they pulled up outside her modest apartment building. "You can always tell me no," he said, turning to her, "but please don't shut me out completely." She looked at him, searching for games or manipulation, but his eyes only held sincerity and confusion. "This isn't a world I know how to trust," she said softly. "Then let me build one you can," he replied. She opened the door but turned back. "You're not just Clara's brother anymore." He smiled faintly. "And you're not just her teacher." The door closed and she walked inside, his coat still wrapped around her. Upstairs she leaned against the wall, heartbeat thudding. In the car, he sat staring at the raindrops sliding down the windshield, wondering what had just begun between two people trying so hard to pretend there was nothing at all. Liam sat in his car, long after Zariah disappeared. Behind the door, the sound of the rain on the roof mimicking the quiet thunder rolling through his chest, a mixture of longing and uncertainty leaving him restless. Days passed with more subtle glances and quieter moments, neither of them speaking of what lingered between them, but both knowing it hadn't gone away. When the invitation for a charity gala arrived, an annual event hosted at a luxurious coastal hotel, Liam instinctively asked Clara if Zariah could attend as her guardian for the night. Clara was thrilled, and Zariah, after initial hesitation, agreed. The evening began with soft music, golden chandeliers, and elegant gowns sweeping marble floors. Zariah wore a graceful emerald dress that shimmered under the lights, hugging her frame just enough to make Liam stop mid-sentence when he saw her. "You look," he started, then paused, collecting himself. "Absolutely stunning." She offered a small smile, eyes shining, but guarded. Throughout the night, they barely left each other's side. The conversations flowed effortlessly, their laughs blending in with the music, their bodies unconsciously leaning closer. But when the storm rolled in, lightning flashing outside like flashes of fate, guests began to leave early, and roadblocks caused delays. The hotel announced road closures due to flooding, and most of the remaining attendees were offered suites for the night. Clara had already gone home early with a family friend, leaving Liam and Zariah unexpectedly alone in the sprawling hotel. A staff member led them to a large suite, apologizing for the inconvenience. As the door shut behind them, silence took over. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rolling like a drumbeat echoing the tension inside their hearts. Zariah walked to the window, arms crossed, watching raindrops race down the glass. Liam stood behind her, unsure of what line he was about to cross. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, not turning. "Just unexpected." "Yeah," he murmured. "But I don't think it's coincidence." She turned then, slowly, facing him with tired eyes that still glowed. "What is this between us, Liam?" He stepped forward, voice low. "Something I can't stop thinking about." She exhaled shakily. "We're not supposed to be here." "Then why does it feel right?" he asked. A pause followed, long enough for both of them to feel the weight of the moment. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Her fingers slid into his like they belonged there. He brushed a thumb over her knuckles and whispered, "I've never met anyone who makes me forget the world like you do." Her lips parted, breath catching. "You don't know what you're doing to me." "Then tell me to stop," he said, stepping closer. She didn't. Instead, she placed a hand on his chest, feeling the rapid thump of his heart. He leaned in slowly, like asking for permission with every inch. Their lips met, soft and hesitant at first, then deeper, hungrier, filled with unspoken truths. They didn't speak for a minute, only touched. Gentle kisses down her collarbone, his hands at her waist, her fingers tangled in his hair. He carried her to the bed as if she was something rare, something breakable. The storm roared louder, but inside the room all they could hear was each other. Whispers, gasps, shared breaths. He undressed her slowly, respectfully, never breaking eye contact, treating every moment like it mattered. And it did. Her skin against his wasn't lust. It was surrender. His kisses weren't rushed, they were reverent. She touched his face and whispered, "I've been so afraid to feel this." And he replied, "I've been numb until you." Their bodies moved like poetry, slow, sensual, and searching. Each kiss was a vow, each caress a revelation. As the rain poured down, they created their own storm, one made of tangled limbs and trembling confessions. Afterwards they lay in silence, her head resting on his bare chest, his arms holding her like he'd never let go. "I don't do this," she murmured, tracing a circle on his skin. "This isn't me." "It's us," he whispered, brushing her braid aside. "Whatever this is, it's not just you." She looked up, eyes wet, not with regret but overwhelming emotion. "I think I'm falling for you." He didn't blink. "You're not alone." She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her like the rain still pounding the windows. "What happens when this night ends?" she asked quietly. He kissed her forehead. "Then I start fighting for you. Because I've never felt this with anyone, and I don't want to lose it." She nodded slowly, heart hammering in her chest. Afraid, but alive. They talked into the early hours, about dreams, regrets, childhood scars, and everything in between. He told her about the first time he saw her, and how he knew then she wasn't just passing through his life. She shared how hard she'd worked to build a life after loss, and how terrified she was to let someone in. They held each other through the thunder, two broken halves finding rhythm in each other's silence. At dawn, as the storm softened and the sky began to lighten, Liam looked at her, his voice raspy from emotion. "I won't let this be just one night." She searched his face, finding no lies. "Promise?" she asked. He cupped her face with both hands. "On my name, my future, everything." And when he kissed her again, it wasn't passion or hunger. It was a promise, sealed in breath, skin, and soul. The morning light filtering through the hotel curtains held a softness that didn't match the sudden chill in Zariah's heart, as Liam stepped away from her kiss, his eyes distant, jaw clenched, voice quiet but cold when he murmured something about needing space, words that made no sense after the night they'd just shared, a night woven with whispers, tender laughter, and promises she thought were real. She waited for an explanation, a smile, some trace of the warmth he'd given her hours earlier. But he'd already slipped into his phone, checking messages with a rigid tension she didn't understand. And then came the knock at the suite door. A soft, venom-laced knock that shattered everything. When Liam opened it, Zaria saw her. The tall, sharp-featured woman with perfectly painted lips and eyes full of manufactured tears. Liam's ex, Olivia, who claimed she'd only come to make peace but within minutes turned her bitterness into a weapon, twisting glances, casting doubts, spinning lies like silk. She looked Zaria up and down, smiled faintly, and with calculated grace said, "I'm just surprised Liam fell so fast for someone who knows exactly how to play the long game, especially one with such a humble resume." Zaria tried to speak, but Liam stood frozen, eyes darting between them, Olivia's words worming into his mind like poison. "She's only after your money," Olivia whispered, when Zaria stepped away to give them space, but the damage was done. Later that day at the mansion, Liam was cold, ice replacing fire, suspicion replacing trust. He didn't ask Zaria how a day was. He didn't smile when she helped his sister study. He didn't hold her gaze. Instead, he stared at her as if trying to decode her every breath, torn between what they had and the doubts Olivia planted. Zaria felt it. Every cold stare, every distant sigh. She tried to speak, tried to remind him of the night they shared, the sincerity in her love. But he looked at her with hollow eyes and asked, "Did you plan this? Is that why you got close to my sister?" That broke her. Her voice cracked as she denied it, but her words barely reached him. He was no longer listening. Olivia had won this round. Liam asked her to leave, said it emotionlessly, as though she were some employee who had crossed a line, and not the woman who had held him through the storm, kissed him like he was the only man in the world, loved him without agenda. Zaria nodded, blinking through tears she refused to let fall in front of him. She packed her bag slowly, walked out with grace despite her shattering heart, and never once looked back. She didn't tell him about the nausea she'd felt that morning or the appointment she had already booked at a small clinic. She didn't tell him she was pregnant with his child. She didn't trust him to care. She stood outside the gates, her chest hollow, rain starting to fall like the universe itself was mourning her loss. Liam watched from the window, his fists clenched, his heart warring with his pride. But he didn't run after her. He didn't call her back. He believed the lies over the truth of her touch. And Zaria walked into the storm alone, heartbroken, betrayed, and carrying a tiny heartbeat she now had to protect. She took the long route home, each step weighted with memories she'd have to forget, each breath a battle to stay strong. She lay awake that night, whispering to her belly, "You're not alone, I promise." The world felt colder, crueler, and yet, somewhere in her soul, strength began to root itself quietly. She would rise. But for now, the goodbye echoed louder than love. Zaria stood silently outside Liam's estate gate, the iron bars, now a cold reminder of the wall that had risen between them, not just physically, but emotionally. Her hands trembled as she placed them on her stomach, still flat, but already the home of two innocent lives he didn't know existed. The betrayal she felt wasn't just from Liam's words, it was in the look he gave her, like she was disposable, replaceable, forgettable. As she walked away that day, she felt like every step she took pulled the ground from under her, but she kept walking. Days turned into weeks, and the morning she sat on the bathroom floor clutching the positive pregnancy test was the moment the storm inside her calmed, because now it wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about survival. She tried to call him, more times than she could count, listening to the cold tone of disconnection and silence that followed. She sent letters, texts, even went to his company once, only to be told he was out of the country. Rumors of him and his ex-fiancée rekindling made her sick, not from jealousy, but from the ache of being misunderstood and discarded like a chapter he wanted to erase. Alone in her tiny apartment, she cried in the quiet nights, talking softly to the babies growing inside her, promising them that even if the world turned its back, she wouldn't. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Hadley, noticed her sunken eyes and pale lips one morning and didn't ask questions. She just made her soup and held her hand. Slowly, Zaria began attending prenatal classes and joined a support group of single mothers where women, some bruised by fate, found healing in shared strength. Each story reminded her that she wasn't broken. just tested. She took on tutoring jobs where she could, saving every dollar, budgeting every meal, and preparing a nursery in the corner of her bedroom using second-hand toys and donated cribs. The day she saw the first ultrasound of her twins, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but awe. Two tiny heartbeats. Two tiny people who would grow up knowing that love didn't need permission or pedigree. It just needed truth. She spoke to them often, told them bedtime stories, sang lullabies even when her voice cracked from fatigue. Every kick she felt inside her reminded her of her purpose, renewed her courage. She stopped asking why Liam didn't care. She stopped waiting. The love she once begged for, she now gave freely to her unborn children. Yet in quiet corners of her mind she still saw his blue eyes, still heard his laugh, still remembered the night he whispered forever into her ear. But forever had been fragile, and now she was building a new one, brick by brick, with trembling hands but a fierce heart. She moved to a more affordable neighborhood, took online courses to improve her skills, and began crafting a future she could be proud of. She bought baby books, painted stars on the wall above the cribs, and folded tiny clothes with a mix of joy and longing. Every now and then, when she saw a man pass with black hair and sharp suits, her breath caught. But it was never Liam. He was gone. And yet, she had found something deeper in the void he left behind. Resilience. Her belly grew, and so did her strength. She stopped hiding the bump beneath baggy clothes and began wearing her motherhood like a badge of courage. When Mrs. Hadley surprised her with a hand-knit baby blanket, she cried like a child herself. At night, she lay awake imagining what her babies would look like. Would they have his eyes, his smile? She both longed for and feared the resemblance. She didn't know if Liam would ever return, if he'd ever ask about her, about what they shared, about what they created. But she made peace with the silence. She danced alone in her living room when no one watched, belly and all, just to feel alive. She kept a journal for her babies, writing them letters they'd read one day, honest letters about love, loss, strength, and starting over. She smiled more, not because she wasn't hurting, but because she chose not to be. Defeated. She created a small life of warmth within her world of pain, and though the nights were still lonely, she found light in every flutter from within. She sang to her belly, she prayed, she healed. And in healing herself, she built a sanctuary for her children to be born, not into bitterness, but into hope. Zariah stood at the hospital window as a soft drizzle tapped gently against the glass, the rhythmic sound oddly calming amidst the whirlwind her life had become. Her body ached from labor, but her spirit pulsed with something fierce and untamed. Love, raw and relentless, as her eyes settled on the two bassinets beside her bed where Leo and Zaya slept peacefully, oblivious to the battles their mother had already fought for them. The pain of being discarded still nestled deep in her chest like an icy thorn. But the moment she had heard her baby's cry, something inside her cracked open, like light bursting through darkness, and gave her a strength she didn't know she had. Sleepless nights were now her constant companion, not because of regret, but because the soft whimpers of newborn hunger and the delicate breaths of tiny lungs were the sounds she cherished more than anything. She would stare at them for hours, memorizing the shape of their little noses, the curl of their lashes, the warmth of their skin against her tired body. And in those quiet hours between feeding and rocking, she whispered lullabies filled with dreams she stitched together from the ruins of her broken heart. She named her son Leo because he kicked with the spirit of a lion even in the womb, and Zaya because her daughter's silent strength reminded her of grace woven through struggle. Money was scarce, but she never let the twins feel the weight of lack, even when she drank only tea for dinner or walked miles to save a bus fare. Because their joy was her mission, their smiles her salvation. She read. It turned to tutoring not out of obligation, but because she still believed in the light of learning, still found beauty in guiding young minds, and because every extra dollar meant formula, diapers, or a warm blanket. She wrapped herself in worn coats, but stood tall in the face of pity, never allowing anyone to reduce her to a charity case, for her dignity had not left her even when Liam had. Sometimes she'd pass the house she once walked into with books in her hand and hope in her chest, wondering if he ever looked out the window and missed her, if he ever felt the ghost of her presence in the rooms they once filled with quiet glances and unspoken feelings. But no matter the ache, she never let tears fall in front of Leo and Zaya, because their mother was a warrior now, forged in fire and softened by the love of two souls she brought into the world alone. Her neighbor, Miss Clarice, a retired nurse with a silver bun and a heart full of wisdom, often helped babysit when Zariah had to rush to last-minute tutoring sessions, and it was through Clarice that Zariah learned little tricks: how to make baby food from scratch, how to soothe teething pain, how to laugh even when you feel like collapsing. She lived in a modest two-room flat where laughter echoed louder than hardship, and though the twins shared a crib, they had more love than any mansion could hold. Each time Zaya gurgled or Leo reached out his chubby hand to grab her braid, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she hadn't lost everything. Maybe she had gained something rarer than wealth: purpose. She decorated their room with paper stars and motivational quotes, not because she could afford fancy things, but because she wanted her children to dream without limitation, to grow up in a home where imagination outshined adversity. Every night she read to them stories of hope, of brave girls and honest boys, of distant land, and kind kings hoping to plant seeds of courage and self-worth in their tiny hearts. Some nights, when they slept soundly and the world quieted, she sat on the floor by their crib and spoke softly to Liam. Not out of bitterness, but because a part of her still wished he'd known the beauty he'd turned away from. But each day brought her new strength, and as the twins began smiling and crawling, their giggles filled the silence left by heartbreak. She taught piano to a rich boy who didn't like music but liked her patience. She tutored math to a shy girl who stuttered but blossomed under Zariah's gentle encouragement, and slowly her name began to spread. Miss Zariah, the magical teacher with the warm smile and calm voice. She didn't seek recognition, but it found her in unexpected ways, from an anonymous envelope of baby clothes on her doorstep to a local blogger writing about the Wonder Woman raising twins alone with grace. She never stopped missing the Liam, who had once looked at her like she was the only thing in the room, but she refused to mourn the man who believed lies instead of her truth. As the seasons changed, so did Zariah. She was no longer the girl who waited for someone to rescue her. She was the mother who rescued herself every day by showing up, by loving fiercely, by choosing hope. And every milestone, Leo's first tooth, Zaya's first word, was a silent victory. A reminder that broken beginnings could still bloom into beautiful lives. On their first birthday, she made cupcakes with mashed bananas and oats, clapped as they smashed frosting in each other's faces, and cried tears that didn't sting but healed. They were no longer just her babies. They were her light, her redemption, the living proof that joy could still rise from pain. The wind outside howled that evening as Zariah returned from a long tutoring shift, her twins asleep in the stroller, cheeks pink from the cold. Her life had found a rhythm of quiet sacrifice and quiet strength, nurturing Leo and Zaya with gentle lullabies, surviving each day with coffee, perseverance, and love. But that agile balance shattered when she found a sleek black envelope sitting on her doorstep, sealed with gold wax. Confused, cautious, she brought it inside, heart pounding as she read the name printed in elegant serif: the law offices of Harold Vance. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the enclosed letter, not expecting the metallic clink that dropped from the folds. A heavy, ancient gold ring with a deep sapphire embedded in its crown. A hush fell over the room, as if even time held its breath. The letter was short, but jarring. "If anything happens to me, give this to the one who holds my legacy." Signed in confident ink, Edward Langston, Liam's father. Zariah froze. She hadn't seen Edward often, but she remembered his discerning eyes, his quiet, knowing glances, the one conversation they shared by the garden where he asked her, without ever directly saying, if she loved his son. Why would he choose her now, after all that had happened, after Liam pushed her away with ice in his voice and fire in his eyes? Her hands trembled as she held the ring, her mind spiraling. Did he know about the twins? Was this his way of accepting them, of acknowledging her? Or was this a mistake? She thought of Leo's eyes, Liam's eyes, and Zaya's curious smile, and her chest tightened. Sitting on the worn sofa with the letter in one hand and the ring in the other, tears welled up and fell freely. She had cried 100 tears alone since Liam left her, but this was different. These were tears of confusion, of cracked hope, of a door long sealed suddenly left ajar. That night she couldn't sleep. She held the ring to her chest, rocked gently, and stared at the ceiling while the twins breathed softly beside her. The next morning, she went to the old photo box, pulled out the only picture she had of Liam, him laughing with his sister, unaware she had snapped the shot from behind the kitchen counter when he made cocoa one snowy evening. The same hands, now coldly unreachable, once brushed her hair behind her ear. The same mouth that once whispered promises had said nothing when she reached out with the news of their unborn children. And yet, his father had seen something. She stared at the ring again, inspecting it closely. Inside, etched in gold, was a name, Langston Legacy. It was more than jewelry. It was a declaration. She tried calling the lawyer listed, but all she got was a recording. This number is temporarily disconnected. No forwarding number, no address. It felt like a ghost had left it behind. For the next few days, Zariah carried the ring everywhere, tucking it in the inner zipper of her handbag, sometimes holding it close during quiet feeding times with the babies. And as the days passed, strange coincidences began. A mysterious deposit appeared in her bank account, enough to cover the month's rent and then some. When she asked the bank, they said it was from a closed estate. Was it Edward's doing? Or had Liam finally found out? She didn't know. At night, she dreamt of Liam, not in anger, but in haunting fragments of what could have been. He'd smile, reach for her, whisper apologies, but before she could respond, he'd vanish like mist. And always, in her dreams, she wore the ring. One afternoon, she walked with the twins to the local library, the cool spring breeze in her hair, the sky a soft grey. An older woman, who looked vaguely familiar, stopped her. "You're Zariah, aren't you?" the woman asked gently. Zariah nodded slowly, unsure. "Mr. Langston used to speak highly of you," she added. "He said you reminded him of his late wife. He trusted you. Said you had a strong heart." Zariah felt her breath catch. She had never heard that before. Never imagined Edward would even think of her beyond pleasantries. The woman reached into her coat and handed her a folded note. "He left this too. Told me to give it to you if I ever saw you." Zariah opened it. Just one sentence. "Some legacies are born of blood, others of the soul. Protect them." Her knees buckled slightly. She sat on the nearest bench, her heart racing. Was this Edward's way of naming her guardian of something larger than she knew? The children, the truth, the family name? She didn't know. But she felt something shift deep inside her. That night, she placed the ring in a tiny velvet box and wrote Liam a letter. She didn't beg, didn't blame, didn't even mention the past. She simply wrote, "I have something that belonged to your father. He left it for the one who holds your family's legacy. I believe he meant me. Come if you want to know why." No return address, just a coffee shop name and time for the next Sunday. She slid it into an envelope, hand-delivered it to his family's estate, unsure if it would even reach him. Then she waited. Days passed like years, her heart beat louder with each tick of the clock. She wasn't sure what would come next, but somehow, deep down, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. 7 years had passed since Zariah last stood beneath the shadows of Liam's world, but today she no longer trembled. She glowed with a quiet power that came only from surviving fire. The ring his father left her rested securely in a velvet box inside her clutch, but its weight wasn't just in gold. It held stories, scars, and silent strength. She wore a flowing emerald gown that hugged her elegant frame, her natural curls pinned back in a crown of grace, her presence commanding without arrogance. Leo and Zaya, now 6, stood tall on either side of her, their hands in hers, dressed like royalty. Zaya in a soft lilac tulle dress, Leo in a sharp navy suit with a tiny gold pin shaped like a lion, just like the one Liam once wore on his cufflinks. As the chauffeur opened the door to the towering gala venue, cameras flashed and whispers rippled across the marble steps. "Who is she?" someone asked. "She looks like someone important," murmured. Read another. With every graceful step into the grand hall, chandeliers sparkling above and violins playing in the distance, Zariah felt her heartbeat drum, not with fear, but with anticipation. The moment had come. The man who once shattered her now stood at the center of the room in a crisp black tuxedo, casually holding a champagne flute, unaware that the woman who held his true legacy had just entered. Liam turned slowly at the murmurs behind him, his eyes scanning lazily, until they froze. Like lightning slicing through a calm sky, his breath caught. There she was, and she wasn't alone. The glass slipped slightly in his hand, catching himself just in time, but the damage was done. His world tilted. Zariah met his gaze without flinching, chin raised, eyes soft but unreadable, the twins at her side a mirror of the man she once loved. For a full 5 seconds, no one in the room mattered except them. She walked with poise, letting her heels echo confidently against the marble floor, each step rewriting the story they once shared. She felt the sting of memories, his betrayal, her tears, the nights she whispered lullabies to the unborn, the moments she almost gave up. But now, those echoes only made her stronger. People parted as she passed, curiosity etched into every stare. Zaya tugged gently at her hand, whispering, "Mommy, is that him?" Zariah paused for a second, then nodded with a calm smile. "Yes, baby, that's your father." Liam, rooted in disbelief, didn't blink. His mind swirled. Was this real? Was this a dream? Those children, his eyes, his nose, his dimple, they were undeniably his. Before he could move, the host took the stage, announcing tonight's honorees and the Legacy Award in the name of his late father. Zariah's hand clenched the ring in her purse, her fingers trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from the deep breath she was about to take. When her name was suddenly announced as a special guest recommended by the late Mr. Hawthorne himself, a collective gasp filled the room. Liam's knees almost buckled. She approached the stage slowly, every seat, spotlight following her. She stood at the podium, opened the clutch and placed the ring atop the velvet pouch on the glass lectern. Her voice was steady, controlled, and filled with emotion. This ring belonged to a man who saw beyond wealth. He saw truth. He gave this to me with a message. If anything happens to me, give this to the one who holds my legacy. She turned to face the crowd, and Liam. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but now, standing here with my children, his grandchildren, I do. Gasps turned into stunned silence. Liam stepped forward unconsciously, his eyes glistening. The truth had not only landed, it shattered everything he thought he knew. Zariah looked at him, then down at the twins, her voice faltering only slightly. I didn't come here to hurt anyone. I came to honor a man who believed in me when I was invisible to his son. The silence cracked with a few sniffles in the audience. Liam moved closer now, whispering her name as though it might rewrite history. Zariah. She turned but didn't step back. Her eyes searched his, looking not for regret but for understanding. You believed a lie and left me out in the cold, but I built a life without bitterness, for them. And tonight I showed up not to shame you, but to reclaim myself. The applause started slow, hesitant, then erupted, raw, stunned, emotional. Liam reached out toward Leo, who cautiously looked up at his mother. She nodded gently, and the little boy stepped forward, placing the ring back into his father's hand without a word, his tiny eyes asking questions Liam didn't yet have answers to. Zaya followed, placing a small flower she had plucked outside the venue on his palm, saying, Mom says you're part of our story. Are you going to read it with us now? Liam broke. His chest caved with a breath he'd been holding for 7 years. He dropped to his knees before his children, tears falling freely as he finally whispered, I'm so sorry. But Zariah stood strong, tall, graceful. She had already forgiven herself, and now the rest was up to him. Liam's voice faltered, the microphone slipping slightly in his grasp as the entire ballroom turned toward the entrance, following the path of his frozen gaze. There, under the shimmer of the grand chandelier, stood Zariah in a sleek emerald gown that hugged her graceful form, her posture regal, her head held high with a quiet defiance that echoed years of pain turned into power. On either side of her, 2 children stood confidently, Leo and Zaya, each holding one of her hands, their presence bold, their faces curious. But it was their eyes, Liam's unmistakable ice-blue eyes, that shattered his composure. The color drained from his face. His chest tightened with a storm of disbelief, guilt, and a longing so sharp it burned. Zariah, he managed to say, breathless, disoriented, like the floor had dropped beneath him. The gala crowd fell deathly silent. Forks paused mid-air, conversations died, and the band ceased playing as if the universe, too, held its breath. Zariah didn't blink. She didn't waver. She simply looked at him, lips pressed into a calm, unreadable line, and gave a polite nod. The twins stood proudly beside her, unaware of the chaos they had just ignited in the man on stage. "Are they mine?" Liam whispered into the microphone, barely audible, but it echoed through the silence like a cannon. Murmurs erupted, gasps fluttered across the room like startled birds. Zariah raised an eyebrow, stepped forward slowly, each heel click echoing the weight of every tear she had shed alone, every late-night cradle, every doctor's visit, every lullaby sung through heartbreak. "They are mine," she replied firmly, her voice clear and resolute, yet layered with a pain she refused to reveal. "And they carry your legacy, whether you knew it or not." Liam stumbled off the stage, unable to process the emotional avalanche crashing over him. Each step toward her was heavy with 7 years of regret. The twins' laws oaked up at him curiously. Zaya tilted her head, smiling slightly. "Mommy, is he the man in the picture you hid in the drawer?" Leo asked innocently. Zariah froze, her heart skipping. The guests whispered louder. Liam stopped a foot away from her, his eyes pleading now, raw, stripped of pride. "Zariah, why didn't you tell me?" His voice broke, choked by disbelief. She inhaled sharply, gripping the ring in her palm, the very ring his father entrusted her with. "You told me to leave," she said coldly. "You believed lies over love. You shut me out without asking a single question." His face crumpled with guilt as he remembered the cruel words he once uttered, words laced with betrayal that had sent her away, unknowingly carrying his children. I was wrong," he whispered. "I was broken. I thought—" "You thought I wanted your money," she snapped, cutting through the air. "But I built a life without a single dollar of it. I raised them. I shaped them. You don't get to erase that." The twins stood silently now, sensing the tension. A tear rolled down Liam's cheek, and he dropped to his knees before them. The guests gasped again. "Leo, Zaya," he said softly, his voice cracking. "I'm your father." The words hit the children like a wave. Zaya blinked. Leo looked at his mother. "Is that true?" he asked. Zariah nodded gently, her eyes moist but proud. "Yes, baby." And then, unexpectedly, Leo reached out, placing a small hand on Liam's cheek. "Then why did you leave us?" The room was pin-drop silent. Liam sobbed openly now, unable to answer. Zariah's chin quivered, but she stayed composed, wrapping her arms around her children protectively. "They don't need your excuses," she said. "They need your actions." Liam nodded furiously, heartbroken. "Please, let me make it right. I'll do anything. I just want to be part of their lives." Zariah looked at him, her heart battling between soul, justice and grace. "You don't just get to walk back in," she said. "You'll have to earn them. Earn me." Liam nodded, tears flooding his eyes. "I'll earn every second. I swear it." She handed him the ring, the one his father left for her. "Start with this," she said. "Your father believed I was worthy. Now you have to prove that you are." And with that she turned, taking her children's hands again, leaving him kneeling on the floor with the weight of his past, the hope of a future, and the heartbreak of a man who had finally realized what he had lost. Backstage, the gala's noise faded into a distant hum as Liam followed Zariah with trembling steps, his heart pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape the shame he'd caged inside for years. The twins' curious glances only deepened his ache, their innocent eyes reflecting everything he'd thrown away in a single cold moment. Zariah stood tall, arms around Leo and Zaya, her aura calm but unyielding, like a storm that had passed but left its mark. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Her voice was soft but firm when she said, "Yes, Liam, they're yours." The words cut through him with a devastating clarity, shattering the walls he had built to protect himself from guilt, pride, and the truth. He stumbled back a step, his breath catching, eyes darting between the twins and her face, trying to process how much time had passed and what had been lost. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice breaking. Zariah inhaled, eyes never wavering. "I did," You just didn't want to hear me then." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was factual, an echo of a pain long endured. He shook his head in disbelief, sinking onto a velvet-cushioned bench backstage, like his legs could no longer hold the weight of his choices. "I was manipulated. I didn't know what to believe," he muttered, as if excuses could erase the years. But she didn't let him escape. "You didn't believe me," she corrected, "and that choice wasn't hers. It was yours." That truth sliced deeper than any accusation. Liam bowed his head, covering his face as sobs overtook him. The ask of the powerful, wealthy man dissolving into raw, broken regret. Leo stepped closer, tilting his head, whispering, "Mommy, is he okay?" And that childlike innocence crumbled him further. Zariah gently touched Leo's curls and said softly, "He's learning to be." Liam lifted his gaze then, eyes red, haunted by years lost. First steps, first words, birthday candles he'd never blown out with them. "I missed everything," he whispered, voice wrecked. "I missed you." Her eyes flickered, a storm battling within them. "You didn't just miss it. You walked away from it." She reached into her clutch and slowly pulled out a black velvet box, her hands steady even as her breath hitched. She opened it and held it out. Inside sat the ring, his father's legacy, the very one Liam had never received. He stared at it, stunned. "He gave that to you?" he asked, voice hollow. "His lawyer did," she said, with a note. "If anything happens to me, give this to the one who holds my legacy." She paused. "Not you, me." Liam blinked rapidly, as if reality were finally taking form. His father had seen what he was blind to, a woman of strength, loyalty and integrity, a mother who carried his name forward without needing his fortune. With shaking hands, Liam reached for the ring, but paused. "I don't deserve to touch it," he whispered. Zariah didn't respond. She simply looked at her children. They were silent, watching, sensing the magnitude of the moment. Liam looked at them too, and for the first time, not as a businessman, not as a wounded ex-lover, but as a father. A man who had run from responsibility and now stood before everything he never knew he needed. Slowly, he dropped to his knees, right there on the polished floor, beneath the stage where he had once commanded attention, now stripped of pride and titles. "I'm sorry," he choked, "for doubting you, for not fighting for you, for leaving you, out to carry all of it alone." His voice cracked, but Zariah said nothing. The silence demanded sincerity. "I was a coward," he continued. "I believed lies because they were easier than facing the truth. But no more." Zariah's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. "This isn't about what you say now, Liam. This is about what you do next." Her words weren't cruel. They were honest, and they echoed with the strength of every sleepless night, every tear she'd wiped from her own face, every lullaby sung with no one to hear but the walls. "I will prove it," he said. "To you, to them, to myself." And with that, he gently took the ring, not to claim it, but to honor it. He didn't slide it on his own finger. Instead, he held it between his palms like it was sacred, fragile. Then, with deep reverence, he looked at her. "This should have been yours. Not just the ring, the life, the respect, everything I failed to give you." For a moment, Zariah's expression cracked, and behind the composed woman was still the heartbroken girl he had left. But she inhaled deeply, regaining her poise. "You can't rewrite the past," she said. "But the future, that's still unwritten." He nodded slowly, standing to his feet, but not stepping closer. "Will you let me be in it?" he asked, not demanding, not assuming, just hoping. Zariah looked down at her children, their eyes filled with questions and wonder. She met Liam's gaze and said softly, "That depends. Not on promises, but on presence." The moment hung in the air, thick with pain, redemption, and something else. Possibility. Not a fairy tale, not a fantasy. Just two broken hearts trying to find a way back to the truth. This time, with two new hearts watching, hoping their father would rise from his knees, not just in guilt, but in growth. Liam remained on his knees, the weight of years lost pressing on his shoulders, his eyes never leaving Zariah's as she stood steady, not with anger but with the quiet dignity that had always defined her. The echo of his father's legacy and the faces of two children who mirrored his own haunted his thoughts as he whispered again, "Please, let me try." At first, Leo and Zaya stood back, wary, clutching each other's hands tightly, as if afraid this man might break the fragile balance they'd known all their lives. But Zariah, with all the strength of a mother and the wisdom of a woman who had built her world from ruins, gave no answer, only silence. Days turned into weeks, and Liam didn't vanish this time. He showed up. Not just with flowers or gifts, but with effort. He waited outside the twins' school just to catch a glimpse, asked to attend their PTA meetings with genuine interest, sat through boring math assignments he barely understood just to be near their world. He learned what they liked, Zaya's fascination with painting, Leo's obsession with stars, and brought them supplies, not lavish but thoughtful. He burnt pancakes on Saturday mornings but kept showing up every Sunday to try again, slowly turning suspicion into giggles. Zariah watched all of this from the edge of her heart, arms folded, observing the man who once walked away, now choosing every opportunity to walk toward them. There were awkward dinners, where silence screamed louder than words, and hesitant conversations where Zaya asked if he liked chocolate milk or strawberry better, testing his memory, judging his answers. There were questions Liam couldn't answer, why he left, why he never came back. But there was one thing he did consistently. He stayed. And with every bedtime story he fumbled through, every soccer game he clapped too loudly at, and every painting of Zaya's he proudly displayed on his fridge, the invisible cracks between them began to mend. Leo once fell off his bike and scraped his knee, and when Liam ran faster than Zariah to scoop him up, the boy didn't pull away. That night, Leo whispered to Zariah, "He's not so bad." And she wept silently. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in tender hues, Liam stood by the kitchen island with Zariah, both of them preparing dinner for the twins who were busy bickering over who loved ice cream more. Liam reached for a carrot, their hands brushed, and time paused. He didn't speak. He only looked at her, silently asking 1,000 questions he wasn't brave enough to voice. She didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either. Forgiveness, she knew, wasn't a moment, it was a journey. And so they moved forward step by unsteady step. Liam asked if he could take the kids to the museum. Zariah said only if they wanted to go. He read bedtime stories over video calls when work dragged him away, and Zaya began calling him Papa by accident one night, and didn't correct herself. Liam cried later in his car. Slowly, the house once filled with only echoes of Zariah's voice now carried traces of another, the deep laughter of a man rediscovering what mattered. Zariah found herself smiling without realizing, humming while folding clothes, even letting Liam fix the squeaky door he once slammed on his way out years ago. At a school talent show, when Leo played his first keyboard solo and Zaya danced beside him, Liam stood beside Zariah and whispered, "They're incredible." She looked at him, eyes misty, and said, "They always were." The twins no longer flinched when Liam hugged them. They leaned in. Zariah still guarded her heart, but it no longer wore armor. It wore understanding. One evening the twins climbed into Liam's lap and asked if he would come again tomorrow. He nodded, choking back tears. Zariah stood in the hallway holding 2 mugs of cocoa, watching the scene unfold like a memory being rewritten. She walked in, handed him a mug, and for the first time since he came back, sat beside him on the couch. They didn't speak, but the silence between them felt safe. Not every scar had healed, but the wound was no longer bleeding. And as Leo fell asleep on Liam's chest, and Zaya curled beside her mother, Zariah looked over at Liam, who mouthed, "Thank you." She didn't respond. Instead, she rested her head back and loosed her eyes, not in surrender, but in peace. Something had shifted. Not because of a grand gesture or an apology, but because love had returned through the side door, quiet, patient, and willing to stay. And then came the morning that shimmered differently, a morning wrapped in golden silence, soft with anticipation and the scent of jasmine blooming along the garden path. The same garden where Zariah had once tutored Liam's little sister with innocent hope and unspoken dreams. Time had aged the flowers and the trees, but it hadn't erased the memory of laughter or the ghost of heartbreak hidden in the folds of each leaf. As Zariah stepped onto the dew-kissed grass with Leo and Zaya holding each of her hands, her heart beat slower and faster all at once, as if it recognized the space but hesitated to trust what waited ahead. Liam stood in the center, no longer the man who had once walked away, but someone transformed, eyes humble, voice quiet, suit neat but plain, as if he knew today wasn't about display, but depth. The twins released her hands and stepped back instinctively, sensing something sacred in the air. Zariah's breath caught when Liam slowly lowered himself onto one knee, not in a grand gesture, but one heavy with humility. In his outstretched hand lay the ring, his father's legacy, the symbol that once confused her, but now connected the past with the present. "This ring," Liam said, voice cracking yet steady, "was given to me not just as an heirloom, but as a reminder of who I must become. I failed you, Zariah. I failed our children. I failed the man I should have been." He looked up, eyes glassy but fierce. "But this is me choosing you, choosing them, choosing to rewrite every wrong." Zariah stood motionless, tears forming as memories of loneliness, of hospitals and lullabies, of birthdays with one parent flashed through her. "I don't want poetic apology." "Yes, Liam," she said gently, the breeze lifting the ends of her dress like a whisper. "I want presence. I want consistency. I want our children to never feel the absence I did." Liam swallowed hard, then pressed the ring into her palm, not forcing, but offering. "Then let this ring mean I begin again. I will not just love you with words. I will build breakfast mornings, school drop-offs, sick nights, dance rehearsals, PTA meetings, and late-night talks. I'll love you in the chaos and in the calm." Zariah looked down at the ring, then at her children, Leo holding Zaya's hand tightly, both staring with hope in their wide eyes. "And if you ever forget this promise?" she asked softly. "Then remind me by walking away," he replied instantly. She nodded slowly, then with trembling fingers, slid the ring onto her finger, not as a prize, but as a choice. Her choice. The garden held its breath. Then Zariah leaned forward and kissed him, gently, deeply, forgivingly, as the twins ran toward them, wrapping their arms around them both in a tangle of giggles, tears, and redemption. In that moment, the pain didn't vanish, but it softened, becoming the soil from which something beautiful had grown. No music played, but their hearts sang. The wind danced through the trees as if blessing them. A chapter had ended, not with bitterness, but with grace. A woman who had once been left alone now stood loved, her children embraced between two arms that had once let go, but had returned, stronger. And as the sun rose higher above them, glinting off the ring now warm on her finger, Zariah whispered to herself, "This time, we bloom together."